Welcome to Wellywood Wargaming, where the grim dark never sleeps. Crack open a bottle of wild snake and spark up a low stick as we take a journey down Underhive.
Good morning, children, and welcome back to Wellywood Wargaming. I am Mr. Johnson, and in today's lesson, we're going to be learning about the top 10 skills in Necromunda. Now, we're just going to be focusing on the generic skills in Necromunda, not the gang-specific skills in this case. I just thought I'd focus on the basic stuff that everybody gets access to in Necromunda. Now, there are some duds, and there are some great ones, and there are some in between. I think overall, the good ones probably come up at about 15 to 20, and I've narrowed that down to a top 10 here that I'm pretty happy with. Again, some people are going to find this subjective to their local meta and whatnot. Please do comment down below and let me know what you think about my picks for this top 10. Let's get into it. The first one here is from one of my absolute favorite skill trees, and that is Ferocity. And this skill is called True Grit. When making an injury roll for this fighter, roll 1 less injury dice. For example, a damage 2 weapon would roll 1 dice. Against attacks with damage 1, roll 2 dice, and the player controlling the fighter with True Grit can then choose 1 dice to discard before the effects of the other are resolved. Fairly straightforward, of course. If you've got a multi-wound fighter, say an Orlok rogue captain who has 3 wounds, once you're down to that last wound and you start taking injury dice, that's where this kicks in. It is a self-preservation skill, and it's pretty good for keeping your leaders and champions alive in games, and I've used it to good effect and kept fighters on the table, suffering flesh wounds instead of serious injuries, or heaven forbid, the dreaded skull. The next one is from the Agility skill tree, something that House Escher gets access to, and this one is Sprint. Now, Sprint, I think most people would consider a good skill. Would they say it's a great skill? I think it depends on how you play Necromunda. For me, I feel that positioning and board movement and mobility are very, very important factors in Necromunda. If you can traverse a big distance in a Necromunda board and get to objectives and things like that. If you're playing scenarios with objectives, then this is a really important skill to have. It just means that you can reposition and outmaneuver and pincer movement on your opponent and stuff. Here's how it works. If this fighter makes 2 move simple actions when activated during a round, they can use the second to sprint. This lets them move at double their movement characteristic for the second move simple action. So, if you have an average move fighter of move 5, and you do a double move, giving you 10 inches, this, using sprint, will give you a 15-inch move. Now that is huge, especially when you consider slow fighters like Goliaths and whatnot. If you have access to sprint, this can be a really, really clutch skill, and it can really lead to you actually winning scenarios, especially if you have it on more than one fighter. Now let's take a look at arguably the best all-round skill tree in that of shooting. This one is Trickshot, and it is as follows. When this model makes ranged attacks, they do not suffer a penalty for the target being engaged or in partial cover. In addition, if the target is in full cover, they reduce the penalty of their hit roll to -1 rather than -2. Fairly simple, this one. It is similar to an Infiltration in some ways, except it's a skill instead of a piece of war gear. It doesn't have any interactions with smoke, of course, but what it does is it effectively reduces your opponent's cover by 1. So if your opponent is in hard cover, they're normally a -2 to hit, right? Now they're a -1 to hit, so they're effectively in soft cover. If they're in soft cover, they count as being out in the open, and if they're engaged, they are free to shoot at as normal. It's a very, very good skill, especially on a shooty gang with snipers like Van Saar or even squat prospectors or something like that. Trickshot is really, really solid, and I tend to pick this for at least one of my fighters in shooty gangs generally. On to another shooting skill. I fear there might be a few in here. This one is hip shooting, and it is absolutely bananas. It reads as follows. If this model is a fighter and is standing and active, they can make the following action. Run and gun, double action. The fighter may move up to double their movement characteristic and then make an attack with a ranged weapon. The hit roll suffers an additional -1 modifier, and unwieldy weapons can never be used in conjunction with this skill. Hip shooting is a very, very good skill. If you have a fighter with high ballistic skill, suffering that -1 to hit just to get into close range and negate that and get the +1 to hit a short range perhaps is fantastic. The fact that you can move your full double movement and then shoot yes, with a -1 to hit, is very powerful indeed, and it leads to all sorts of shenanigans, especially when you double this up with templates. Web guns, flamers, hand flamers, you name it. Using a template with this doesn't give you any -1 to hit, of course, because templates automatically hit. Delac, hip shooting web guns are a thing, and they are horrifically powerful. So I generally try and avoid that one, but I've seen it used many, many times, and it is so powerful. So hip shooting absolutely has to be in the top 10 here. On to another shooting skill here in Fast Shot, and it reads as follows. This model treats the shoot action as simple rather than basic, as long as they do not attack with a weapon that has the unwieldy trait. Pretty simple, but pretty damn good. This one is basically your double tap. If you like, you can take 2 simple shoot actions in your activation, because simple you can do more than once. This is great for snipers, it's great for grenade launchers, it's great for all sorts of things, even templates as well. I have a player in my current campaign with a fast shot rad gun, which is pretty nasty as well. It's situational, but when it comes off, very, very nasty indeed, dishing out all those flesh wounds. So fast shot absolutely has to be right up there because it is just so, so powerful. Right, now the next one is a leadership skill, and the only leadership skill I believe I have in this top 10, and this is Overseer. Now, Overseer has changed a little bit. It has devolved in some ways, which I think is a good thing. This skill used to be a bit broken. It now has been nerfed and made a bit more reasonable. However, it still deserves a spot in the top 10, and here's why. Overseer. If this model is standing and active or mobile, they can attempt to make the following action. Order double. Make a leadership test for this model. If the test is passed, pick a friendly fighter within 6 inches. That fighter can immediately make 2 actions as though it were their turn to activate, even if they are not ready. If they are ready, these actions do not remove their ready marker. Effectively, what Overseer does at the cost of a leadership check, by the way, most leaders get access to leadership skills and they have decent leadership stats as well, usually 6+ or 5+. What this does is it means that your leader, who's usually the one doing it, foregoes their activation that turn so that they can make another fighter effectively go twice. Now, you can do this in a number of ways, and you can do some real shenanigans with it. If you have a heavy weapon with no suspensor, for example, suddenly you can move that fighter, or even move that fighter and then shoot with it, things like that. There's a lot of options in here for doing really nasty, horrific stuff. Making a fighter charge twice, for example, things like that. The options are kind of limitless here. Now, there is a range of 6 inches on it, so you do have to queue things up well. And of course, your leader does have to pass that leadership check. But before they nerfed it, there was no leadership check. You just did it, and, it was very, very good. The one downside with Overseer, I feel, is that firstly, it's kind of a bit cheesy, and secondly, it means that your leader, who typically should be the best fighter with the most equipment and the best stats in your gang, isn't really playing in the game, and that's something worth considering. You're getting a very powerful effect out of it. However, you're basically losing your leader out of it, so it's worth thinking about that. Back to the ferocity tree now, and this one is Nerves of Steel. I think this is probably the most picked skill that I've ever encountered in any campaign that I have played. Lots of fighters get access to ferocity, and this one really is the cream of the crop, and here is why. Nerves of Steel. When the fighter is hit by a ranged attack, make a cool check for them. If this test is passed, they may choose to not become prone and pinned. In a game where the pinning mechanics can really win or lose games, this is such a vital skill for those slower, close combat focused gangs particularly. Nerves of Steel means that if you get shot at and you pass that cool check, you're still standing and able to do what you want to do when you activate. So you can pull off that charge without getting pinned. You can do lots of things that might frustrate you otherwise. And this is great on anyone that can get access to Nerves of Steel or ferocity skills, even as a secondary, should consider taking this skill because it is really powerful. Another problem I see with this, though, is people really spamming this skill, particularly in Goliath gangs. You get lots of Goliath gangs with just Nerves of Steel everywhere. It is a bit boring, and it's very powerful. Try and avoid spamming these skills if you can, but at least one of your fighters has to take Nerves of Steel. That's just a given. Now onto some cunning skills, and this one is Overwatch, and it reads as follows. If this fighter is standing and active and has a ready marker on them, they can interrupt a visible enemy model's action as soon as it is declared, but before it is carried out. This fighter loses their ready marker and then immediately makes a shoot basic action, targeting the enemy whose action they have interrupted. If the enemy is prone and pinned or seriously injured as a result, their activation ends immediately and their actions are not made. Back in 95, every single fighter could do a version of Overwatch. Thankfully, that has been retconned, and now it is a skill that's only available to gangs and fighters that have access to the cunning skill tree. This is an exceptional skill, particularly on snipers. This one is really important for snipers with long rifles, long lasers, needle rifles, you name it. The Overwatch skill is built for snipers, really. The one thing about this, though, is it does state that it's at the start of the action. So if someone's hiding round a corner, if the opponent is hiding round a corner and you can't see them at the start of their activation, then you can't shoot them. However, if someone's in the open, then you absolutely can do it. It does mean that both your actions are taken up with this Overwatch skill, but interruption is so important in this game. When someone's planning to do something and you just go, nope, you're not doing it anymore, it can be so good. Now, you can't aim with this, so you've got to use it on a fighter that's got a decent ballistic skill and stuff, but it's really, really good, especially on those snipey guys. Into another cunning skill here in that of Infiltrate. Infiltrate is just universally ridiculously powerful. It's good on anyone who has access to it. It's especially good on fighters that don't normally get access to it, especially close combat melee monsters or people with web guns like Sneaky Delac. Infiltrate reads as follows. If this fighter should be set up at the start of a battle, they may instead be placed to one side. Then immediately before the start of the first round, their controlling player may set them up anywhere on the battlefield that is not visible to any enemy fighters and not within 6 inches of any of them. If both players have fighters with this skill, take turns to set one up, starting with the winner of a roll-off. There you have it. It is just huge. Most scenarios have very strict deployment sort of conditions, and this is completely ignoring all of that. Corpse Grinder initiates get this built into them, and it is really a problem, especially when you have mass infiltrate of a lot of fighters that can just go anywhere. If you have scenarios that have specific winning conditions, like getting objectives and loot crates, things like that, this will win you games early on. It is a little bit too powerful, and there are some cases where I like to nerf it and perhaps give those fighters just a free simple action at the start of the game instead of giving them the full infiltrate. But I think arbitrators have to rule on this one when infiltrate is too much and when it's acceptable. Of course, Delac thrive on infiltrate, and you've got lots of different types of infiltrating fighters like Ambots who can do this, and they are really tricky customers as a result. On to the last one here, and we're going right back to agility. This one is Spring Up, and it's kind of similar to Nerves of Steel, except it's an agility skill. So it's available to very different fighter types that get access to Nerves of Steel, and it reads as follows. If this fighter is prone and pinned when they are activated, make an initiative test for them. If the test is passed, the fighter may stand up, basic action for free, and if the test is failed, the fighter may still stand up, but it costs 1 action as usual. So with Nerves of Steel, you're taking a cool check to avoid being pinned. With Spring Up, you get pinned, but then you make an initiative check to stand up for free. They're very similar, and they both give you full range and scope to do what you want to do with both your actions when it's your turn to go. However, I would say that Spring Up is slightly better in terms of the way that it works. The fact that you're pinned means you're usually less easy to hit. There are usually negatives to hit you at long range if you are prone on the ground, whereas with Nerves of Steel, you're standing. So I think being pinned and being able to get up again for free is slightly better than just being able to not get pinned in the first place. However, they are very similar, and they are both equally incredibly powerful and fantastic skills for any fighter in Necromunda. So there you have it. Those are my top 10 picks for the best skills in Necromunda, the best generic skills in Necromunda. I'll probably come back and do a best house or gang specific skills video at some point, but for now I think this one is good for the newer players who just want to get a grip on the skills and how to use them and stuff. Those are some really good picks for you. However, Please avoid spamming this and being cheesy with it because, you know, if you've got a whole gang with Nerves of Steel or Spring Up or Infiltrate, it can be really annoying for your opponent. I always recommend mixing and matching. Take some good skills, sure, because you want to win some games, but also just mediate yourself a little bit and have some decorum when picking your skills. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll be back with another video real soon. Please do like, share, subscribe, and check out the Patreon as well. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.